The Flash. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
The long-awaited, much-anticipated The Flash, which I think has been in development now for what, 6 years, 5 years? Ever since
When
Justice League?
was Justice League? That was
17, I think.
2017? Yeah, so
Yeah, I'm
since
pretty
then.
sure.
Yeah.
This is what we were pretty much promised after that. And I think what we ended up here with 5, 6 years later is a far cry from what they probably set out to do 5, 6 years ago when the
But
universe was
that's
alive
not
and
a
well.
bad thing, though. That's not a bad thing.
I don't know if it's a good thing either, and we'll get
Okay.
into that too. But yeah, this is the ultimately now we still don't really have clarity on this, but for lack of clarity's sake, let's call this the last movie in what was the DCEU, the universe that started with 2013's Man of Steel. So this is the 15th entry into that universe. 14 movies, one show, of course, Peacemaker. The one that we saw most recent to this in that universe would be Fury of the Gods, which we saw in March, which we both thought was okay, was fine.
Well,
Before
it should
that
have
was
been
Black
better.
Adam. Yeah,
Should have been
yeah,
better.
yeah, and that's sort of the common theme with this whole entire universe. Goo, I would say this universe is mercifully coming to a close after 10 messy years. However, you could argue that it finishes on somewhat of a high note here.
Yeah, I think it finishes on definitely in its handful of best movies. Within its handful of best movies.
Yeah, a Mount Rushmore DCEU
Yes.
movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think at worst you could argue it's fifth, but to me it's probably at least number 4. The Flash is a rated PG-13 action adventure, fantasy, and sci-fi with a runtime of 144 minutes, so it's on the longer side, but the pacing is such that you don't really feel like it's a 2.5-hour movie.
I did feel it a smidge at the end of the second act, heading into the third act. That's
Okay.
when it did get a bit long. And when it comes to being rated PG-13, they, much like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, do push the PG-13.
Yeah, they get away with a couple things in here, that's for sure.
Yes.
A couple cuss words in here. The ratings. This is very interesting, and we are recording before the full audience score is out.
I'm going to turn my headphones off because once again, I don't care.
On Roddy T's, this has 72% from the critics. That's out of 143 critic reviews. That would be 5th best behind Peacemaker, Wonder Woman, the Suicide Squad, and Birds of Prey. Currently, the audience score, Goo. Now, this is less than 100 audience reviews, so I don't even know why the number's up there, but it's at 95%, which I think is understandable. It probably will drop a little bit, but I think this is going to end up being around 90% audience score wise. On Metacritic, Goo, a 61 from 36 critic reviews. That's also 5th behind those same 4 properties, just ordered differently: Wonder Woman, The Suicide Squad, Shazam, and Peacemaker. So you can shit on Roddy T's all you want, but I think what we can take away from that, Goo, is definitively Tom Cruise, James Gunn, you're all big fat liars. This is nowhere even remotely close to the greatest comic book movie of all time. It's not even the best DC comic book movie of all time. It's not even the best DCEU comic book movie of all time.
So I still would like to see Tom Cruise. I would still like to see Tom Cruise's Letterboxd to see what else he likes. But for James Gunn, the stuff in this movie does kind of mesh with the things that he likes or that he talks about.
Yeah, this movie's fun. It's funny.
Yeah.
And it does feel like, even though he probably had little to do with this movie because he came on so late in the process, it does feel like it has a little bit of a James Gunn fingerprint on it.
It does try and go outside the line on some jokes. And even in the opening act with that action sequence, it felt very Gunnian, if you know what I'm talking about. We'll talk about that.
That's a word.
And spoilers. But Gunn tweeted out earlier that he saw the first cut for this a year ago before he was the head of, the creative team. So, I mean, it's probably gone through a bunch of reshoots and, recuts, but I don't think he had that much to do with it.
No, I don't think he did either. But again, why it's sort of a for better or for worse from going back to 2017, 2018, because I feel like once you walked away and had a few hours a day to live and sit with this movie, you almost feel like it didn't do enough, right? And probably in part because they're saving some cool stuff or stuff that would have been in play here for what Gunn's going to do?
I would say that what hurt it for me would be the internet knew every secret.
Yeah, that's true. But also, like, the quote unquote secrets don't really have anything to do with the plot of the movie.
So what that would have done for me is maybe I would have had like a bigger blown away first feeling about the movie.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, you take a, day or two and you think about it and you say, okay, that wasn't that great.
There's a moment. It
did take away a couple moments that if I didn't know about, I would have made a real mess in the theater.
There's a moment in this movie that if it was unbeknownst to us,
yes,
you would have passed out from the cum. No doubt about it. You would have completely
I would have been
passed
so
out.
full.
It would have been one of those moments where you finish, you just roll over and fall asleep, and I would have had to wake you up.
I would have been like that meme of like the dehydrated body.
Good. This movie is written by Christina Hodson and Joby Harold. Christina Hodson, you may know, she wrote Bumblebee and Birds of Prey, so they brought her back for a second DC property. Goose, she's also writing Fast X Part 2, which is very interesting, and is signed on to be the writer for Marge Bob's Pirates of the Caribbean movie. And additionally, she was the writer on the scrapped Batgirl movie. So what an up and down ride she's had so far.
You know what would be sick is if Fast X Part 2 was Fast X Part 2 and the whole movie was just in French out of nowhere.
Joby Harold, you may know from King Arthur, Legend of the Sword.
Talk to you later, Jobin.
He also wrote Army of the Dead and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Upcoming, he's got My Hero Academia. So coming into this movie, I thought that the writing was going to be the weak point of the movie, and I think I can confidently say it wasn't. The overarching story I have an issue with, but I think that was sort of out of their hands. The writing in this movie, the humor, and the character-to-character interactions, I actually thought might have been the best part of the movie.
Yeah, and telling Barry's story, telling, losing his mother, having to deal with that grief multiple times, I think what they do in this movie with that is great. And they also handle all of those other characters that they introduce into this movie extremely well.
Yeah, I agree. Good. This movie was directed by Andy Muschietti. I don't know how you want to say it there, but he is the director from Mama, It, and It Chapter 2. Upcoming movies, he's got Welcome to Derry and Attack on Titan. I don't know if I had issues with the direction per se, but there are some things in this movie that don't look great, and some of it does have to do with direction.
I don't think that has to do with him. A lot of that is CGI.
Yeah, some of it I think is direction in the way he chooses to shoot a couple things, but you're right, a lot of it is the CGI.
A lot of the wonky look of this movie is the CGI and the breakneck speed of how, like, say, Superwoman moves around and uses her powers.
Is she Superwoman or Supergirl?
I think it's woman now.
I feel like it was Supergirl. I'm pretty sure it's Supergirl.
I don't know, man.
Doesn't really
You can
matter.
call her whatever you want.
Dude, the synopsis of this movie. Barry Allen uses his super speed to change the past, but his attempt to save his family creates a world without superheroes, forcing him to race for his life in order to save the future. Good enough.
That's kind of it, but
Good
it should
enough.
say metahumans.
Yeah, I guess so.
Because
Yeah.
Batman, he doesn't have
exists.
superpowers, but he's still a superhero.
Still a superhero, I agree. This movie stars Ezra Miller as Barry Allen, the Flash.
Boo. Not to Barry Allen. Barry Allen was fine, but Ezra Miller, boo.
Yeah, get this out of the way. Obviously, he seems like he's a pretty bad person. I actually think in this movie, it's the best we've seen him so far as the Flash. Goo, Michael Keaton as Bruce Wayne / Batman. What do you have to say about him?
Vindicated. I was wrong. I was right. And I knew it all along. Oh, man. What a turn. What a turn.
Yeah, as a noted non-Keaton guy, I'm not really a fan of his Batman. I gotta say he was great in this. The best character in this movie. I really enjoyed the take on the character that we got.
I loved him back in 89 and 92, but I'm also willing to say now that over the past 30 years, ?
Yeah.
He's become a better actor as well.
Sure. Yep.
He has so much more range, and what he does with this character, he's all over the place.
Yeah, he does a great job. Elsewhere here in the movie, we get Ben Affleck as Bruce Wayne Batman, who is Not in it maybe as much as I had wanted, but he does a good enough job. I don't think he was as strong as Keaton in this movie, but that's not to say I still don't like him more. Sasha Calle, I believe it's pronounced, as Supergirl. She was okay. I didn't think she was great. I didn't think she was bad. Michael Shannon as General Zod.
Hearing him talk about this movie, he's just like, I don't care.
Yeah, he doesn't care. We don't care.
He doesn't care. They even said, you know, what was it like to return to being Zod? He's like, it wasn't that satisfying. I'll tell you that much.
Ron Livingston as Barry's father, Harry Allen. I actually thought he was great. Yeah,
I thought both of his parents great.
I really liked it. Yeah, and speaking of his mother, Mary Belle Verdue as Nora Allen. She was very good when she needed to be. Kiersey Clemens as Iris West, Barry's basically his love interest.
Yeah.
She's like kind of oddly spotted throughout this movie. They almost force her upon you.
Yeah, funny in like the one or two scenes, or she lets Barry be funny in the one or two scenes that she's in.
Yeah. A real negative about this movie, and I don't want to make little kids feel bad. Ian Lowe as Little Barry, I thought it was fucking terrible.
Is that Little Barry or Lil Barry?
Whatever you want. Lil Rel Howery, Lil Barry. I thought it was really bad. I thought it was terrible.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
A couple more here before, and there's some spoiler stuff that we'll get into in spoilers. Gal Gadot obviously pops up here as Wonder Woman. It almost felt like she was in the very first cut of this movie, and then what we got at the end was a lot less of that.
It almost felt like she was on the set of Shazam: Fury of the Gods, and they said, "Hey, can you come over here for a second?
We need you for a scene," because she's literally in here for a scene.
Yeah.
And then I thought this character's only in the movie for maybe 5 minutes. Sean Rogers as Gary, roommate of Barry. I thought he was fucking unreal. Stole the show
with the leg.
Yeah,
he was awesome.
Absolutely killed me.
Yes.
Some prerequisites for this movie. Basically, how much did the prior DC stuff matter? Now, you would think 15 properties in a movie billed as this massive sort of crossover event, maybe conclusion to these 15 properties. You'd think a lot of stuff would tie in here. Unfortunately, you don't get hardly any tie-ins. Essentially, all you really needed to see prior to this movie to understand the movie was Man of Steel and Justice League. I think that's about it.
Zack Snyder's Justice League.
No, because that's not canon.
No, but it's Speed Force.
Okay, fair, but it's not canon, which is weird.
I know, but it's Speed Force.
Yeah, but that's a good point. The Speed Force in that is used a little differently, though.
But it's still used, and he discovers it in that movie.
Sure, but I mean, it's like introduced sort of in this as well. I don't think you really need to, but it's watch both Justice Leagues, I guess. But point here is 15 movies in, and you're telling us basically 11 of the 15 don't matter.
That's fine.
Cops said they didn't matter.
Yeah.
And also, there's a little bit of a sour taste left here because it's a bit of an unsatisfying quote unquote conclusion. And I'm not so sure anything that happens in this movie means anything.
It's satisfying in learning a lesson, but not necessarily like it's not satisfying in wrapping up this world. That's pretty much what you're saying, right?
It serves a purpose for one character and one character only,
which is okay though. It's
okay in a vacuum, but leading up to this with some flashpoint promise, it doesn't really satisfy those ends.
So Mac, I think I have a couple issues with this movie. My biggest one is that you're in a couple scenes and then out of nowhere, the CGI just looks like trash. How did this happen?
It makes no sense. I don't know how they've been working on it for so long. And especially actually to your point here, them using the Speed Force in the Snyder Cut. I don't know how it not only looks worse in this movie, but not only does it look worse than from the Snyder Cut, but it just doesn't look good. It doesn't look good.
Between that, there are some action scenes that you get taken right out of. And also, there's a scene at the beginning of him running that looks like a PS3 cutscene.
I still can't get over the way this man runs. I don't know who told him to run like a speed skater.
Do you think that they were up against the wall because, X-Men already used the coolest possible running scene and Sonic did a pretty good job with it. So they're like, shit, we got to do something.
No, I think you could have just had him run like a normal person and it would have worked. Like if you watch Usain Bolt run, it is a completely different stance than what the Flash runs.
I'll tell you what I would have liked is if they recast Barry Allen with Usain Bolt.
Obviously, that's not a great example, but if the fastest human on the planet doesn't run remotely close to what they show us the Flash running like, it just doesn't jive. And I guess that you do explain it away like he's skating over the shit, so the speed skating sort of stuff. I don't know. It just doesn't look good. Although it does lead to one really funny
Ellie De La
scene
Cruz.
Yeah. Fastest sprint speed in the league right now.
Crazy. Straightforward speed, babe. And then also, like I said earlier with Gunn and how this movie, kind of goes a little outside the bun with their jokes and maybe with some of their action. They take some bigger swings here and get a bit weird on what Barry has to do. Like at the beginning of the movie, this isn't really a spoiler, but he needs to save babies falling out of a hospital window.
Yeah,
doesn't necessarily look great.
It looks not good.
It looks not good. But the idea of it,
yeah,
I appreciate.
It's fun. So that's the interesting thing about this movie. Those two ideas are like bouncing back and forth in your head the whole movie. A lot of it doesn't look great, but what they're doing is fun and funny.
Like, I'm like, that's unique. Right. We haven't seen this yet.
Yeah, it's a weird battle going on in your head the whole movie because you're like, oh, this is fun, this is cool, but it doesn't look that great. It looks like it's from 2012.
It doesn't look good. It doesn't. And we're not saying they did a bad job. Whoever greenlit it did a bad job. Whoever said, all right, let's put this to print, whatever, it's cool.
And us being only, a few days, a week removed from talking about Across the Spider-Verse and how amazing of a job that those animators, and there's a 14-year-old kid that animated the Lego scene in that. And you can't tell me this $220 million movie can't have good CGI. It just doesn't. It has been a DC problem the whole time.
I will say this though, is that they said, okay, yeah, we had a budget of $220 million, but we had to give 150 of that to Michael Keaton. I would have said money well spent.
Yes, you would have said that.
I said that ROI on that payment right there is pretty goddamn good. All right, Mac, let's get into the gauntlet before we give our hot dog scores and start diving into some spoilers because it's really tough to talk about this movie without spoiling anything. Fun factor, and I think there is tons of fun. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of the main character, he still had some pretty good humor there. And then everything with Batman. Batmans, if you will.
Batmans.
Great. Thumbs up.
Yeah, consistent fun throughout. And that's really what, if you look at the best of DC so far, be it Peacemaker, the Suicide Squad, or Shazam, with honorable mention to Wonder Woman, what separates those from the pack is the fun those properties have and the fun you have throughout the runtime. And so that's why, even though this isn't in the top tier, I don't think it's in the conversation with those because thematically it feels more like those.
Satisfactor, how satisfied were you by this movie? And by the end of it, satisfied in a way that I wasn't expecting because I wasn't expecting them to wrap it up as they did.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because I think there's several satisfying moments in this movie for a lot of moviegoers. Being that some were ruined by Reddit, for me, I didn't quite get that satisfaction. Additionally, I'm a little dissatisfied with the lack of like multiverse and crossover stuff we got.
Borometer, how boring was this movie? And I don't think it was super boring. I already talked, it's a little tick, end of the second, beginning of the third act. And then also there is a storyline in here that wasn't necessarily boring, but I thought it was wonderfully stupid.
I wouldn't say boring either. But I do think the big climax of the movie is pretty predictable. You catch on maybe 10 or 15 minutes beforehand. Yeah. And so maybe because it's so predictable, it feels a bit boring in that moment. But no, in general, not boring. The barometer is low.
Aquator, it is better than 2017's Aquaman.
Sure is.
Halloween. Will this movie get worse over time for you or get better? I don't know. Will it wane? And I don't think it will a ton for me. I think usually with movies like this, the big Easter egg movies, the big cameo movies, after that initial pop, you do get that wane. But going into it, you knew what all of these were going to be. And I've kind of sat on it a couple days, and I'm still around the same.
Yeah, I agree with you more or less in that it didn't it didn't exceed my expectations. It didn't really fail to meet them either. It sort of like landed the plane roughly as I expected. But because it's not going to mean much going forward, at least I don't think, there's not going to be much reason to come back to this either. So probably naturally it will ween.
Pants Tent City. Excite, bike, mania. What got you going in this movie? And it's very simple. One word, Keaton. Keaton, baby. There is one action scene in this movie where it is stuff that, now we've seen some really good action Batman scenes over the past decade with Affleck, with Pattinson. They gave us one with Keaton that I just loved. I loved everything about it.
Yeah, that Keaton scene, I don't think, first of all, it's a true pants tent for anyone.
Also, it's definitely not Keaton in the Batsuit, but
sure,
that Batman doing those things is fucking dope.
It's a true pants tent for anyone that loves Batman, just like kicking the shit out of like 15 villains in a room. It really is satisfying. I don't know if it's quite Batfleck level from BVS.
No.
And there's also a couple cool Battinson scenes in
everything
the Batman.
in fucking Battinson.
But
Battinson.
It is in the conversation for best Batman scenes we've seen. So that's honestly impressive considering that Keaton Batman, we had never had a scene like that before. Max
Credit Union. Who are we giving credit to? And I will give it to my Italian brethren. He's Italian, right? Muschietti?
Yeah, it's got to be.
Muschietti. I would say for juggling this whole movie with all the topics and for having it, it's not too overwhelming, which is pretty good. I think that's done pretty well.
Yeah, it's weird you're giving the director credit. I'm giving the writers credit here, but we don't really love the movie. I got to give the writers credit, but
I can't give Keaton every award.
This is in part because I had such low expectations for the writing coming into this movie, and I thought it blew my expectations out of the water. This movie is legit funny, legit hysterical, and I was worried about that going in.
For those of you tardy to the Mac and Goo party, we rate everything on a 40 hot dog rating system. Mac, I shall go first. And I think the most important thing for everybody going into this, and this will really influence how much you like the movie, is how much do you like Ezra Miller's Flash? Not Ezra Miller in general as a person, but his depiction of the character, his depiction of Barry Allen, because not only is there one of him, but there is double trouble. There is a parent trap. There is two of them, and the younger one is turned up to 11. He's way, way more annoying.
That's a good way of putting it, yeah.
So if you love that character, I think this is more for you than for me. I'm also willing to ignore some wonky CGI, but there was a lot. Like around each turn, there was more weird CGI that I didn't love. But the movie's pretty fun. And Michael Keaton is just fucking amazing in this. He saves the movie for me, not necessarily from being a terrible movie, but it goes from being a good movie, one that you might not remember, to being pretty memorable because of him. I love him. The charisma, the humor, the action scenes, like I said earlier, not necessarily with him, but with that character. And he needs to be brought back for the Batman Beyond movie that was promised to us. Not really promised, but they had greenlit it and then they took it away. But make this movie with him as the surly old Bruce Wayne, because we see it here. He can pull that off and it'll be fucking amazing. Affleck, also good as Batman. Everything Batman, thumbs up. There are some really great cameos, really good Easter eggs, ones that I really wish I didn't know about because they would have fucking blew my pants off. That's not even a saying, and it would have happened. They would have flew up to the ceiling.
My pants would have flown.
So I liked a bunch of stuff in this. I loved some stuff in this, but the movie didn't really blow me away. I got it at 33 hot dogs.
Now, before I get into my dog score, do you think your score is affected by the fact that you were sort of expecting like a 40 dog movie let's say 2 months ago. Once
Gunn
came out and said that, once Cruise came out and said that, you're expecting like 38, 39, 40 hot dogs.
Sure. But also, if you gave me like 10 more minutes of Keaton, 40. If you give me more money, 35.
I think coming into this movie, I didn't expect it to be any better than like a 36, 37 dog movie. So I think that helps my score, and maybe that's why your score isn't as high as some people might think. All right, Goo. Don't get me wrong. I do like the story and the very human message this film has, especially to round out our hero, to round out Barry. It really works for Barry Allen, the Flash. However, it is hard not feeling disappointed with the lack of multiverses or crossovers after once again being promised a bill of goods that we simply did not get. This is getting pretty tiring for these big multiverse events where we really just operate in two. In fact, it suffers from the exact same problems, not all of them, but many of the same problems that Multiverse of Madness had. Where going in, you're expecting, let's say, 5 crossovers or whatever, and you really just get one big one. And so it's a little bit of a letdown. So ultimately, this movie feels more like a solo movie, oddly enough, than it does some massive crossover, despite the inclusion of some certain characters. So I suppose calling it The Flash works because it really is just a movie about the Flash, how the Flash grows, how the Flash gets rounded out, even though it's quote unquote a multiverse movie. One of those characters, though, Goo, as we've talked about extensively here so far, is Michael Keaton's Batman, and he's flat out awesome. He's the best character in this movie, and he also provides what I think is the best scene in this movie, giving us a Keaton scene we had never seen before in the bat suit. Also, to your point, I think the next best scene might be the opening with Batfleck and that whole chase thing. That was pretty sweet as well. And to expand on what you were talking about with the CGI, I think that's going to be a really common criticism of this film. Maybe the most common criticism is this lackluster CGI. And again, all this talk about this movie being one of the greatest comic book movies ever and having a budget north of 220 million. There's no excuse for the loads of bad CGI in this. There's none. There's no reason for it. And several scenes in here that are supposed to be great or maybe emotionally great feel a little less because the CGI is not good. So it actually does take away from moments in this movie. And my final real criticism of this movie, and it's probably the biggest, it lacks a good villain. It's almost devoid of a real villain. Because if you want to, and you know, it does work because of the Barry stuff going on. But if you want to compare this to the GOATs or talk about this being one of the greatest comic book movies of all time, it needs that. It needs a great villain, a villain that we hate or a villain that we can understand their motivations. And it doesn't have it. And then once you really figure out what's going on in this movie, it loses a little bit of steam as well. And I do think probably they pulled back on some of the possibilities and potential of the story because they're planning on using some stuff in the future, or Gunn's planning on using some stuff in the future. And I get that, but it does ultimately hurt this movie. All that being said, Gil, I laughed out loud on a shit ton of times in this movie. This movie is hysterical. There's loads of fun. I do wonder, because it does get like silly and goofy, especially with the young Barry, if there's some Love and Thunder fan reaction to this, that it's almost a little too goofy or too silly. I don't have those thoughts. I thought it was really good, just as I thought Love and Thunder is really good. So, Goo, I have this at 34 hot dogs. It's the third best DCEU movie to me, behind the Suicide Squad and Shazam.
Yeah.
I forget what I gave Peacemaker, but I think it's right around that as well. And those are just ahead of Wonder Woman. And for me, probably the fourth best movie of 2023, just narrowly edging out Quantumania, but those might flip-flop as the year goes on. They're different. Quantumania's got a great villain, maybe missed on some other parts, and The Flash has some great moments throughout, but lacks a great villain. So it's interesting to think here that I might like this movie a little bit more than you, considering how we were going into it.
So I have this third in the DCEU, but right around where Wonder Woman is. I still have The Suicide Squad at number 1, Shazam at number 2. And then on the year so far, I have it around 5 or 6, right around where Blackberry is. Maybe a little bit lower than Blackberry.
And for comic book movies, below Across the Spider-Verse, below
and Guardians. Yes.
Guardians, and you have it above Quantumania as well.
I think I have it not well above Quantumania. I have Quantumania around like 31, so it's 2 or 3 dogs higher.
All right, yeah. So I liked Quantumania a bit more than you then. Okay.
But Quantumania, hear me out, didn't have Michael Keaton.
Oh hi, it's Goo from the Mac and Goo Movie Club. If you like what you just saw, you can find full episodes of our program on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, CastBox, iHeartRadio, or wherever podcasts are found. And now it's time for girls jumping on trampolines.